So just a quick agenda, just to show you what we're going to be working through today. We're going to talk a little bit about what financial wellness is and what financial literacy is, just covering some basic little topics there. We're going to go through the 5 steps to effective budgeting, and then ask if you're ready to go with your steps. Talk a little bit about budgeting as a student in particular, and kind of explain a little bit more about what cost of attendance is versus your actual budget. And we're also going to introduce iGrad, which is the school's financial literacy platform that you have access to for free, no cost, just creating an account with your school email address, and you are all set to go. Just a few housekeeping items to add to the other housekeeping that we talked about. I am going to ask if we can to keep yourselves on mute just to make sure we have the opportunity to, chat through everything nice and clearly. And type your questions on in the chat. We have a couple of spots where we have some dedicated Q&A stuff, so I can definitely take questions there, but put them out throughout. And if there's something I can nab while I'm looking at the chat, so if you see the eyes dart to the right, it's because I'm trying to make sure I stay attentive to your questions. That's where my chat box is, but please feel free to put them in there and I'll answer them throughout the presentation and during those Q&A stops. But more than anything, I want to really thank you for taking the time to invest not just in your wellness efforts today, but your financial wellness efforts. It's one of those areas that's kind of a new coming idea to wellness, certainly from the financial perspective. So I'm glad to be able to share some really great, valuable resources and information with you today. Before we get started, I wanted to find out what everybody's hoping to get out of this presentation today. So if there's something specific you're looking to learn, or if you're not really sure, there's a couple ideas on the screen about some of what we'll talk about. This is just to kind of feel out kind of the questions that you might have so I can try and address that for you as we go through. So if there's anything, please feel free to pop that in the chat, and I'm happy to take a look. In the meantime, though, as you guys are going through and adding any feedback that you have, I'm going to go ahead and press forward so we can keep on time for our presentation. So what is financial wellness, right? If we look to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or the CFPB, okay, they suggest that it's a state of being where you have control over your day-to-day or month-to-month finances. You have the capacity to absorb a financial shock. You're on track to meet your financial goals, and you have the freedom to make the choices that allow you to enjoy life. Now, that sounds very, very grandiose, right? But that at the same time is very much what wellness is. It's an individual perspective of the way that you relate to any given topic and how it makes you feel. So financial wellness is no different than that. However, we don't just become well, right? We have to figure out how to get there. And that's where financial literacy comes in. It's the path to financial wellness. It's a set of skills which encompasses knowing when and how to find reliable information to make a financial decision, knowing how to process financial information to make sound financial decisions, and knowing how to execute financial decisions, adapting as necessary to stay on track. So it makes sense, right? We have financial literacy, which is knowing how to do these things. And then we have the place where we want to be on the financial wellness front. Okay. However, a key important topic within the literacy realm, right? In addition to a knowledge component, there's also an action component, which is the ability or skills to put your financial knowledge to use. And that's going to be a big focus on some of what we talk about here today. Before we move on, I do see we had a couple of people chime in on the things they're looking to find out more about. We have budgeting tools, we have long-term planning. This is actually some of the things we'll be talking about in this presentation today as well. So as we get to those points, we can chat through them. And if you have questions that I didn't get a chance to address in the basic material, we'll chat through, you pop it on in, and I'm happy to give you some information. Before, again, I move to the next slide, you will notice that there's actually at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, there's resources that we link to in iGrad, that financial literacy platform that I mentioned throughout this presentation, okay? And they're going to be linked in this document for you. And I actually have a resource to share after the presentation as well. So that's also linked in here for you, and you'll have copies of this and be ready to go and take all that information with you, okay? So when we talk about getting ready to start budgeting, right, we have to talk a little bit about behavior change and how it affects the budgeting process. One of the more popular models that are out there, certainly when you look into the medical realm or the health services realm, is the trans-theoretical model or stages of change. And it's a 5-step model. It starts off with pre-contemplation, which is in and of itself just not really being ready for any type of change just yet. Contemplation, which is thinking about doing something. Okay, determination or preparation, which is getting ready to go, making your plans. Action, the actual act of doing, which makes sense. And then maintenance, maintaining a good behavior. So if we think about it in a more familiar sense, right? If you're thinking about like dieting or weight loss, for example, these all kind of make sense, right? You're getting ready to do it. I need to do this. And then you go ahead and start planning to do it. And then you actually start working through it. And then you get into maintenance. This works just as well for the budgeting process. And when we talk about budgeting, what it really is just the practice of balancing your expenses and your income. Or you might also think of it as the process of creating a plan to spend your money, right? There's the act of what we currently do and then where we want it to go. There's 5 steps that we're going to walk through in this process. We'll talk about understanding needs and wants, which sounds kind of simple, but in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot to think through. Setting goals, understanding what your income and expenses are, how to make a spending plan, and then assessing and adjusting for both those immediate things that we think about in our budgeting process and those long-term things that we think about as well. Now, with that said, on the right-hand side of your screen, you actually have just kind of a little model of how the budgeting process, those 5 steps, ultimately overlap with that trans-theoretical model to help you understand that process. So to start off with, pre-contemplation, it's not in the bubble, right? We are not thinking necessarily about doing anything. We don't necessarily think that anything needs to be changed. We've all kind of gotten past that stage just by coming to this presentation today. That put us into contemplation. We're starting to think about doing something. It's on our mind. But from there, we get into preparation, and that's where understanding what your needs and wants come in and evaluating your income and expenses, and then starting to set your goals, for example. That's ultimately that preparation that goes into the act of creating a budget. Okay. And then we move into making a spending plan and assessing and adjusting. Those are the actual action components, right? We're going to go ahead and start and make our actual plan and then adhere to it and make sure that it is still serving us by evaluating it as we go. And just like that trans theoretical model, this is cyclical, right? We have to go ahead and go through this process more than once because we change as people as we go through life. So this isn't something that we can do statically today and have it meet our needs tomorrow necessarily. We have to think about it today to think how we can make it serve us for tomorrow. And one of the really great tools that iGrad has to kind of start talking on how to create a budget, and a lot of the material in this presentation came from that resource material, is they're creating a course, they're creating a budget course, which you can see linked at the bottom of the screen as well. So when we talk about needs and wants, right, the very, very basic understanding of what those are, needs, they're basic things that are necessary for survival, makes sense. Where wants are things we desire to make our lives more satisfying, okay? Now, we have to remember needs and wants are subjective. Okay, they're determined by our individual values, our attitudes, our beliefs, our emotions on any given day, and we ultimately express that as our behaviors, the way we interact with our money in the budgeting process. Now, when we think about those being subjective, this ultimately is going to talk a little bit about why. We have to understand what values really are, right? They're strongly rooted fundamental principles that universally guide our motive or motivate our individual actions and decisions. And they influence our understanding or the value that we have placed on things. The reason that that's important is those are hard ingrained in us. Values are very, very difficult to change. So it's really important to make sure that you understand your values and think through them as you're going through a process as analytical as finances, right? A lot of people don't realize how much our behaviors and our beliefs and our attitudes and our personality ultimately play into our finances. But I think several of us have certainly gone out and kind of done some emotional purchasing. I certainly have. Me and Amazon have been friends over the last couple of months, and we're trying to, give ourselves each other some distance at this point. But if you're having some difficulty, it's really easy to try and find a way to make yourself feel better. And that certainly is something to think about in this process. Now, as we get away from values, right, those core things that are really difficult to change, we also have beliefs, right? They're similar, not exactly the same though. There are assumptions that we hold, which can be true or not. It could be fate, luck, and they have a capability to influence a situation or an achieved desired outcome. And they're often not necessarily rooted in logic or supported by facts. So these are the things that you may have learned through, cultural norms or societal norms as you're kind of going through life, or it could be something that your family has practiced for a long time that you maybe haven't gone and experienced for yourself or thought to view in a different way. These are things that could potentially change based on new information as it's brought to you. Now, your attitudes are opinions or feelings or your disposition toward a person, thing, or situation, right? And those are influenced by your values, beliefs, and ultimately your emotions on any given day. And they all result in the type of behavior or the actual representation of your expression of feelings through your body language, your words and actions, or inaction with any given topic. So when we think about our finances, we can really see how they're all interdependent on each other, right? If we have a value that we know we can't cross a threshold on, that's going to influence how we better understand what a need or a want is, just because we all have our little individual ideas of what's important. Same idea, our attitude on any given day. We might have a really great day and we decide, we want to go out and celebrate and have a really nice lunch or something along those lines. Or ultimately, maybe we've had a really terrible day and we're trying to feed our soul. That all can go into those impulse purchases that exist in the world. So this is just to give you a scope of how wellness really plays into the budgeting process. Now, with that being said, we know that we need to think through our values, our beliefs, and all of those things. This really goes into assessing a need versus a want. And these are some of the ways that you can ultimately choose and some of the tools that you can use to do that. On the left-hand side of the screen, I have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I am betting many of us have heard of before. Anyone that might have taken a Psych 101 class, this is one of those first topics that they cover. But ultimately, there's five different levels of different need assessment according to Maslow, starting off with your physiological, which are those really basic needs, your breathing, food, water, all of that stuff. Then we have safety. They're also really, really important. It's your security of body, employment, housing, all of the really kind of core stuff that come after those immediate physiological things that we think through. From there, love and belonging, those are your friendships and all those other relationships that you have. Your esteem, which is how you feel about yourself and the respect that you garner by others. And then lastly, self actualization. Those are those bigger concepts in thought, morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving. And the concept behind this triangle with these needs is that you have to generally meet your base needs before you can start to think about the ones above it. The lower ones have higher priorities, but at the same time, we're all seeking to fulfill them all. We can't just think about our physiological. That's not the way that human beings live. We have to think through the rest of those different areas as well. So if you're thinking through whether or not something is a need or a want, some of the things that you can ask yourself is ultimately the questions that we're listing here. What need is this expense fulfilling, right? Is this something I ultimately need because of a physiological need, a safety need, a belonging need? Where am I actually feeling what I'm doing with this particular purchase or any recurring expense that you have in your budget? Can you fulfill that need without what you currently have or with a less expensive alternative? That's a really difficult thing to think through as well. We all have those things that we absolutely really, really want, but maybe there's another tool or expense we can replace that with. How important is it to you? And would you miss it? And if so, why? This is really important when you start talking about belonging, esteem, and self actualization. It's one thing to say that, maybe having a dinner with friends is not the highest thing on one person's assessment of a need versus a want, but at the same time, your emotional well being can be very attached to your connection with other people. So it might be something that at any given time you start to prioritize a little bit higher. It's a balancing act and something that you do want to think through as you're doing the budget process. One of my favorite questions is probably the last one that we have at the bottom. Will you feel the same way if you ask yourself these questions in an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year? For any expense that we have, it's really easy to get into the immediacy of things and how we feel about anything today. But as we talk a little bit about long-term planning, we have to think about whether or not something we're looking to budget for or something that we're ultimately paying for in our budget is serving our needs now and forever, right? A really great example. I have a younger brother who very recently bought a new car, new to him car, we'll call it that. Really, really proud of the purchase. It was a little bit more money than he probably should have spent. However, he found a great deal on it and in the heat of the moment bought the car. Um, with that being said, he ultimately moved to another state where he has not been able to get insurance for it because it doesn't necessarily meet the registration and insurance requirements that it needs to for this other location that he's in. Now, that is something that he's working through at this point because he didn't think through it on a long-term scale, right? This is something that I can use today, but he wound up ultimately moving and getting married 6 months later, and that car really isn't serving his needs in the way that he needed it to. Just to give you an example. So as we go ahead and stop Quickly, I wanted to see if we had any questions or if there was anything I could clarify so far on what we've chatted through. All right. Well, you do know you can certainly share questions as we go in the chat. I'm going to continue on then, and we're going to move to our next step, which is setting your goals. After identifying your needs and your wants, right, thinking through those values, beliefs, all that stuff we just chatted through, you want to go ahead and focus turning your wants into goals and developing a plan for achieving them. When we think about what wants are, again, just to restate it, those are something we desire to make our lives more satisfying. Now, when we think about what a goal is, it's an idea of the future, a desired result that a person or a group of people envision, plan, and commit to achieve. So when we think about our wants, it's really, really easy to see how we can turn that into a goal, right? I want it, which means I don't need it today. Goals are things that happen in the future, so we can plan for them. How we plan for them ultimately is by creating a system, which is the process you'll use to reach your goal. And when we talk about goals, one of the really important things to think about is how long it's going to take you to achieve it. And that kind of falls into the next slide that we'll be talking through as well. But to start with, we want to kind of structure our goals into short term, intermediate, and long term planning. When we talk about short term, we're usually referring to about a week to 6 months, and that might be going on vacation, maybe buying some new furniture or appliances, a down payment or a purchase of a car, things that won't necessarily take forever to accumulate, but you do need some time to plan for. Where intermediate, 6 months to a year usually, you might be looking at saving for a down payment for a house. That certainly could go longer though, depending on the type of purchase that you're looking to make. Planning a wedding also could go longer depending on the type of event you're looking to have, or paying off an outstanding debt, again, depending on the size of the debt and your personal budget. And then long term, something that's greater than a year. Saving for college is certainly one of them, or retirement, which not a lot of people tend to correlate as a long term goal. Yes, it's a place we need to get to in the future, but it's a goal as well. Not everybody has the opportunity to retire unless they plan to do so. Or even building and maintaining an emergency fund. Now, an emergency fund might be a short term goal for actually establishing one, or even intermediate, depending on the amount of money you're looking to put away. But it's long term in the sense that you have to continue committing to it, right? It's something that can be fluid. Emergencies happen. That's the whole point of having that emergency fund. You may need to withdraw money out of it and then recreate a plan to refill that particular fund. Now, as you're doing this, a really great tip for goal setting is to develop SMART goals and systems to support them. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they are on this next slide. So when we think about SMART goals, it's a goal setting mechanism that ultimately outlines 5 key things that you want to make sure you're thinking about as you set your goals. You want to make sure that they're specific, meaning that they're serving your purpose and ultimately have really tangible steps to potentially get there. You understand very explicitly what this goal is meant to be. It's measurable. You have a way of assessing a metric towards completion. It's achievable. It's not something that's so out of the realm of realistic that you can't ultimately achieve it, right? Let's say you want to go to Mars. I would love to go with you, but I don't see that happening for us right away. And when we talk about realistic in this sense, it means, is it realistic to you? Is this something that ultimately serves your purposes? You're not looking to do something for somebody else or to try and meet a need for somebody outside of your own circle. You're looking to make something that's realistic and purposeful to you in your SMART goals. And then lastly, timely. This is where those long-term, short-term, and intermediate goal time setting frames come from. You need to be able to not just, set an end date, right? That's extraordinarily important, but we also need to think about measuring in between and then setting a time for completion. Now, with all of that said, this is all very fluid, right? Our lives change, so our goals can change. So you make sure you set up a plan, but at the same time, let yourself be flexible as things occur. I did see a question come through if the slides will be shared. I absolutely have them to share, and we'll double check with University Life before we finish. I absolutely am happy to put those together for everybody. Now, when we think about SMART goals, a well-developed system within that SMART goal will determine if your SMART goal is achievable. It's going to answer the questions on how you can accomplish the goal and how realistic the goal is based on other constraints such as financial factors, right? Does it work within the financing plan that we have? Now, when you're thinking about a system, they can be anything, right? For some people, it's just a matter of writing it down and checking it off day by day, week by week, whatever it happens to be. One of the really great examples that are out there, let's say you're looking to go from not running at all to running a 5K. You can't just get up off the couch and run a 5K. It doesn't work that way. You have to sit down and think, all right, well, here's my goal of 5K. What do I ultimately want to do? That means on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I'm going to start by walking for 10 minutes during the morning. I'm going to take my lunch hour. I will walk for 10 minutes. I will run for 15. I'll walk for 10, run for 15. And then by the end of a certain period of time, you'll go ahead and up the ante, maybe do a little bit more until you get to the point where you're ready to run that 5K. In doing that, you've talked about how you can accomplish the goal. You've talked about who's involved. It's you, right? This is something you're dedicating to yourself and what resources you might need. Is this something you can do outside, let's say, or do you need to go ahead and set up a space for yourself? How much and how many, right? How much time do I need to commit to this? How many dollars might go into something like this? If you don't have access to outdoor running, for example, do you need equipment? That might be a question. And then when? When is this ultimately something you're hoping to achieve, right? When do we want to run that 5K? Very simply, a goal tells you where you're going tomorrow, and the system tells you what to do today to get there. And this is no different in any realm of finance. So if we think about this in the perspective of an emergency plan, if we're ultimately looking to set up $1,000 and we want to have that in the next year, we can think through that and say, all right, well, here are my finances. How much do I need to set aside each month to get to my $1,000 goal? And work yourself through that process. Now, before you can do that, you need to understand what your income and expenses are, right? We need to know exactly how much money comes in and how much goes out. And that sounds like something that most of us would have a really great grasp on until we go and actually assess that information. Uh, as a really great example, I actually utilize some of the tools that we're going to talk about on this screen to do this for myself. And in doing that, I was able to find some habits that really were kind of detrimental, not only to my finances, but just to my time overall. And I'll share that with you as we go through. As you go through to assess your income and expenses, you want to define a period to evaluate whether it's 2 weeks, a month, a semester. And a semester might make sense for students if you're utilizing student aid, for example, which often comes in once per term. It can be a little easier when you think about it. But you do want to make sure you're considering during that period if there were any points where you have some atypical spending or if you've had extra money sitting aside, because not every period will look exactly the same. Using the semester as an example, if you don't attend during the summer, it's probably not a great mechanism for comparison. You wouldn't want to use that time period. And then from there, right? What came in, what went out. And what you're actually seeing on this screen is iGrad's daily income and expense diary, which is also resourced for you as well. And the way that this tool works is it's got a day by day category area on one sheet within this spreadsheet where you can track how much money you spent and how much money you earned on any given day in a month. Day 1, 2, 3. So if day 1 you had your rent due, you put $1,500, whatever it happens to be. Day 2, you decide to go and have some coffee. Day 3, you get your paycheck. Day 4, you move into another expense or money that came to you. So this is a really, really fantastic tool if you're just not really familiar with where your money is going to get a better understanding of it. After the end of that period, you see what's on the left-hand side of your screen. Okay, this is actually an assessment with a really nice visualization of the amount of money you spent, where, and what came in. It'll give you a graph showing you how much of your money went to different areas, let's say housing expenses, also medical expenses, those immediate need things, or the areas that include like fun money, going out, having social events, things like that. So if you're looking to kind of see where your money currently is going and where your opportunities are, this is a really great tool to help you do that. As you're analyzing, what you're really looking to figure out, you want to ask yourself some questions. It's were all your needs met? And if not, can you identify why and what can change, right? Ultimately, if you've gone through and you don't have enough money at the end of a month, we need to figure out exactly what caused that and where we have the capability to make some changes. What expenses are fluid and what aren't? Our rent is due every month. That's something that has to be paid. But at the same time, if we're looking at a grocery budget for one person of $400, maybe that's what you spent, that might be something we can look through. We can see if there's any way to bring that cost down, or if there's some other things that you're paying for, maybe that you don't need to. A Netflix account might be a really great example. Is that something that you absolutely have to have? For some of us, yeah, it is. It absolutely is. It's a big quality of life problem if we don't have it, but for others, it won't be. So that's again that individual assessment of needs and wants, going to your overall wellness within that budgeting process. Some of the other things you want to think about as well, were all of your expenses included in the evaluation period? Again, we'll talk about that in a few slides again with some better examples. But did you have everything that you expect to pay at any given period of time happen in this month? And if not, you have to remember that as you go through to make future plans. One of my favorite questions to ask, which a lot of people don't think to do, is did you have extra resources? This impacts how you prioritize and plan for your goals and prepare for financial emergencies. So if we want us to, want to go on a really nice vacation in the next 2 years, let's say, for example, I'm hoping to go to Belize in the next 2 years. We will see what the world looks like. But with that in mind, what I would want to do as I was going through this process is see where I had money that ultimately was just hanging out there that did not necessarily get spent, and what is the best use of it for me. If I have that goal set up, I can say, all right, well, I had an extra $50 here. I didn't spend nearly as much as I thought I would. Maybe that's somewhere I can see an opportunity so I can actually put it towards one of those goals. Okay. Now, the next piece of this, right, we talk about our budget. That's the now of everything. We're assessing what's happened. The whole purpose of doing that is to go ahead and make a spending plan. Now, the spending plan represents your current and anticipated resources and expenses, the direction your money will take, and the goals that you hope to achieve. So it's a hybrid of your budget and what you want to happen moving forward. This is where the long-term planning starts to come in. Okay. You want to start off by estimating your projected expenses and income. And that can be very, very difficult, right? But there are some really great resources out there to help you do that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, has really great information on occupational earnings information to approximate what you expect your income to look like. Move.org has some general spending costs for utilities, both nationally and state by state. And iGrad has a plethora of calculators to help you better understand the value of your future investments and savings, including retirement as well. And we'll actually have a presentation later on within the term through the wellness initiatives that we're going through today that talks about retirement information. So I hope you can join us for that piece as well. You also want to make sure you're considering all your available resources, right? So in the immediacy of things, does your employer have any type of assistance benefit that they offer? Certainly like tuition reimbursement, perhaps. Do you have any other resources outside of what you currently are thinking through? Retirement is a really great example of this, right? If you are looking at doing this really long-term spending plan and thinking through how you want to save for your retirement, you want to go ahead and think about the resources that you already have available to you in that process, and then how you can work around those resources. The most important thing, though, is that self-reflection is crucial, right? We already talked about needs and values. The reason that that is so important is that we need to make sure that we're always looking through this process and adjusting as those things change, because we ultimately will not be successful in making a spending plan if our plan no longer serves us. It needs to meet our needs. So you want to make sure you're reflecting often. As you go ahead and put together that spending plan, you want to make sure that you're meeting your current needs first and then prioritizing and planning savings and goals based on your other available resources. And there are so many different platforms out there to help you do that. We've already looked at one in particular, which is the iGrad Income and Expense Diary that we just went through. They also have a really great budget tool within the platform itself, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. This is designed to be in the platform, and it actually integrates with the platform. So the information that you utilize and include here will be available to you in other things that you use within that platform, other calculators, courses that you take. And anytime that you integrate and work with this platform, it actually customizes the experience to you based on the way that you're working through it. So it's a really nice platform as far as utilization goes and being a one-stop shop, so you can have all your information in one place. And it's a really simplistic tool. It's as simple as just putting the information in, and it kind of gives you this kind of net cost on the in and out of the income side of things. Now, that being said, this is not the tool for everybody, right? There's plenty of different app-based options out there, or fintech, as you'll hear it referred to. Certainly, you want to take a look through any app that you might potentially use, make sure it's safe and worth your time and money, and if you're utilizing a paying service. You also have the opportunity of various different software programs. Excel is certainly one that I've already talked about, but there's plenty others out there that are dedicated to financing. And then one of my favorites is called the back of the envelope method. This is kind of for those people that are a little bit more tactile, right? You want to actually be able to see money in your hand. The idea behind this is you have an envelope, you flip it over, you write the budget category on it, and you take the literal cash that you have available for that in any given period of time and put it into the envelope. And that's what's available for you. That's great for people that have a hard time conceptualizing what money looks like on a credit perspective or a student loan perspective or even cryptocurrency, right? For several of us, it's just really, really hard to understand what money looks like and feels like when we don't actually touch it. That's where credit gets so dangerous for some people. So back of the envelope method could be something to help you kind of learn the tactile feel of money as you're going through that process. But no matter what you ultimately try to use, if it doesn't work the first time, don't think it's a failure on your part, right? It may not be the right tool. So be open to using other things and be willing to try several different options and see what works for you. It's a cyclical process that you're continually assessing through, and the tools that you use are equitably important in the process. So when you're creating your spending plan, these are going to include just some really key places that you ultimately want to make sure you're thinking about, right? The key items that you want to make sure you're including in your budget, of course, you want to have housing, your utilities, your transportation as it applies, food, medical insurance, which isn't always on the top of our mind, though in this environment it may be, telecommunications like your phone and internet plan, and any recurring memberships that you have, like a gym or any other clubs, things like that. Now, if you're struggling with where to trim a budget, let's say you're finding as you go through this assessment that you're really just not sure how to make things work a little better for you so you can achieve the goals you're looking to achieve, these are some of the areas where you might be able to make some adjustments, right? In housing, are you spending more on rent than you really need to? Is there an opportunity to downsize? Same thing with transportation. When we're on campus, we're all in Manhattan together. Do you need a car? Probably not. Travel, right? Is vacation a priority for you right now? Memberships and subscriptions. I know I am guilty of this one. I have several different subscriptions that I sign up for and get, journals and things like that. Do I need all of them? No, no, I don't. So that is actually a place where I'm looking to make some adjustments in my budget. And personal care, gifts, and extras, right? We have to take care of ourselves and other people, but at the same time, we have to think about how much we can honestly afford to do that. So those are just a few areas where we can kind of reshape our thoughts on our budget. And some of the areas where we often forget about these costs that can pop up occasionally, right? Some of the costs associated with driving, repairs and other insurance costs, things like that. Seasonal costs, like our holidays over the period of the year, things along those lines. I don't think any of us are forgetting about education, certainly because we are in in school now, right? So that's probably not something that we're forgetting too much about. But certainly when we talk about some of the other areas that are here, those can definitely start to add up if you don't remember to include them within that budget, like extra medical charges. And as we go through this, you're actually going to see some of the examples of that in our assess and adjust section. Now, when we assess and adjust, right, this is where we're going to figure out how well we did in our process. On the left-hand side of the screen, what you're actually seeing is a snapshot of iGrad's simple budgeting worksheet. This is another Excel tool that they have, very similar in concept to the one that we viewed previously, except instead of it being a daily tracking thing, it's a month to month to month to month type of tracking. So you have your income and expenses, and you go ahead and put the allocations all together on a monthly amount. And at the tail end of it, you can assess over a year how things went. And this is a sample budget. These are just very simplistic numbers that I popped together for everything. But this will give you an example of what looking at a budget might look like. You'll see, for example, at the top, the income that's coming in is listed. And then underneath it, we have different categories, including our housing, transportation, health costs, personal and family expenses, as well as debt and obligations, things that we need to pay. And then we also have planning for savings and goals. That's listed in here as well. And it's got a column set aside for your planned expense and how much you think you're going to have or need to spend. And then on the other side, you also have the actual cost or money that came in. And the difference is highlighted for you on the very tail end of this particular spreadsheet. What I did for this particular example is I went ahead and color coded it so that when we go through it together on the next slide, we can see where we had some really great opportunities and some potential to make some needed adjustments. Now, as you're reviewing this, you want to take a look at each budget item and your overall expenses and identify any unusual or unexpected spending differences. They might indicate that you need to make adjustments or that you can reallocate resources, as I noted. You want to compare the information against any previous assessments that you've done. And this is a key area on that annual example in this particular tool that we're talking about here. This helps you contextualize whether or not an issue actually exists and it's persistent, or if there was an anomaly at any given time, right? Let's say, a medical expense is a great example. If you really went over budget one month on a medical expense, is that something that you need to be concerned about? Of course you do, but is it something you need to be concerned about with long-term planning? Only to make sure that you can afford to handle, that medical expense as an emergency, or is this a recurring medical issue that you need to prepare for? And then from there, you're self reflecting. You want to ask yourself, how well did you stick to the plan? And were you realistic with your spending planning goals? Did we meet all of our benchmarks or didn't we? And did we not meet them because we weren't realistic, right? Did we go through and actually use our SMART goals to set up our goals and to achieve them? Where did you struggle and succeed and why? What made you go off course? Was there something that influenced you? Let's say you had, a really, really, really bad day and you went on a bit of a shopping binge. Is that in here? And then you can think through and see ultimately what might have influenced that particular behavior so that you can think about it on a present scale and how you can change things. Not all going off course is equal. If you underspent in parts of your spending plan, why do you think that happened? Was it circumstantial, or do you expect long-term changes to happen, or are there better ways to choose to allocate your resources? And most importantly, does your spending plan still serve you? Is what you're doing ultimately getting you to the things that you're hoping to achieve? As our lives change, the spending plan that we set up at the beginning of 2020 very likely didn't look like the end of 2020, right? We need to make adjustments as those things occur. There are links on this slide to both the blank version of this particular spreadsheet as well as the example that we're going through today. So that's referenced for you as well. Now, putting into context, this is what that assessment actually looks like, right? Review each budget item and your overall expenses. And in doing that, I highlighted 17 different areas, which we will not talk about in full, where there were opportunities to do a little bit of looking, right? Where did I ultimately see things go the way they should or shouldn't? In some of the categories, I will overspend, right? Utilities, TV, internet, medical emergency and diagnostics, groceries, personal items. So those are all listed here for you. Those are areas where I actually spent way too much money. We're over budgeted in auto insurance, fuel, doctor appointments, prescriptions, and entertainment and student loans, right? Now, why did that happen? Okay. If I think about it, my utilities, TV, internet, medical emergency was an anomaly for me. Groceries, we're currently in a work from home environment, and several of us are certainly learning in a remote environment, right? So I'm home more. We're all kind of in the house a little bit more. So the idea that our utility expenses went up certainly does make sense. Now, where I'm over budgeted, my auto insurance, fuel, doctor's appointments, things like that, when I think about my auto insurance and the fuel costs that I have, I'm not going to work every day, right? So that's something that ultimately was very, very much over budgeted for, given the current environment. So that's just kind of areas that you can potentially see where you might have opportunities to make some changes. If it's something that's, interim and temporary, which we are going through now, maybe it's not appropriate to go ahead and make really long-term changes. But if I see that I have all of, this extra money at the end of the month, I have a period of time in which I can say, wow, maybe I can really start putting away towards a goal that I didn't think I'd be able to get to right away. If I ultimately want to go ahead and purchase a new car and I need a down payment for that, right? Something more fuel efficient so I can work on my overall budget and making that better in the long run. This is an opportunity, if I'm not spending on those cost expenses for travel, to take it and repurpose it to another area. So those are some of the ways that you can kind of use the now information to think about that forward planning process. As always, you want to make sure you're comparing every month to month to month in your spending habits to see if there's anomalies. For this example, we're saying that there was not. And then self-reflect and assess and adjust as necessary. That's the whole idea behind what you're doing. It's tracking is one thing, but using the information to make it meaningful to you is ultimately going to make it far easier to do the long-term planning that you're hoping to achieve what you're hoping to achieve. Just a brief stop before we continue. Were there any questions that I can offer to answer for anyone or any feedback that you'd like to share so far? All right, I'm going to go ahead and press forward then, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the here and now. Budgeting as a student, right? For a lot of our students, we do find that the understanding of what my cost is, really versus what the school says I can potentially utilize versus what I should be planning for when I get to school can be really, really difficult. And one of the really great tools that exist for you to better understand what your costs may look like while you're at school is called your cost of attendance. It's the amount a student may reasonably expect school to cost over an established period of time. You might hear it referred to as your COA or your budget, and it applies to both an academic year as well as each term that you attend, and includes what we call direct and indirect costs, which we'll touch on those on the next slide. Okay. Um, you do get this information both with your award eligibility if you're a student aid recipient, but there's also estimates on the Student Financial Services website, and that will be a linked resource in the information that goes with this presentation as well. I do see that we had a question pop through. Are there any applications for the desktop or mobile that you would recommend if we would prefer to budget offline? Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Unfortunately, we can't endorse any one product over another, but what I would generally suggest is take a look at a couple different products, and a lot of them offer kind of free trials on the online side of things. I know nobody wants to go and purchase a software that ultimately is going to cost a whole lot of money, but I would start by using the tools that are already available to you to see what you like about them and then what you don't. And then you can look at those other options and see what they offer in comparison. It's probably the easiest way to find an offline tool that will ultimately serve your needs. So if you start off with something like Excel or Google Sheets, whatever it happens to be, and start your tracking in that process, and you say, okay, well, I really like the idea of being able to manipulate and put all of this information in, but I wanted to do some of this automatically. You can then look for a tool that ultimately has some of those key components to it based on your assessment from the original tool that you utilized. Thank you for that. So going on to direct costs versus indirect costs, right? When we talk about cost of attendance, these are two words that get thrown around a lot. Direct costs very simply means it's a cost directly related to your education as assessed generally by the school. Okay, that includes your tuition, the per point or credit rate multiplied by the number of credits you're taking, or your flat rate costs depending on the way that your tuition is structured, and any of the fees that are assessed by the university, which some of them are listed there that could potentially apply to your circumstances. Now, indirect costs, right? This is where it gets a little more gray. Those are required expenses to attend school that are not exclusively assessed by the university. It could be living expenses like room and board, your books and supplies, transportation, personal expenses, all that other stuff that you have to ultimately pay to get to school, but not necessarily to the school. Okay. Now, with that said, what is cost of attendance really, right? If we put it in context next to your expenses, right, they're the actual cost of your financial obligations, the things that are specific to you based on your individual circumstances, your geographic location, your housing arrangements, your personal choices, of course, your value and belief systems, and may or may not include school related expenses. So let's say you have an Amazon Prime subscription, right? That's a really fantastic thing to have, but it's ultimately not something that's required for school. So that will not be expressed in your cost of attendance. Now, your cost of attendance is that representation of those school related expenses, and it's based on average reasonable costs as they relate to attending school. It's also the maximum that a student can receive in financial aid, and it's made of required school related expenses. However, it's not your bill. Okay, that's the information that you have available in SSOL. This is just a representation. The big difference, though, is to think actual versus approximate. And the way that you can ultimately utilize this is what we'll talk about on the next slide. So here we have the three different things we've talked about in this context. We've got the expenses in our budget. That's the assessment that we went through together. We have our cost of attendance in the center, and we also have our bill, the information that we get out of SSOL, right? Now, when we think about this in context of budgeting, right? If I want to understand how much school is really going to cost me, not just tuition and fees, but the overall cost of school and what I ultimately need to be prepared to pay for throughout my attendance. That's where this cost of attendance figure comes in. And what I did is I opened up the information that's there that approximates things like room, board, personal expenses, and transportation over a given period of time. So you'll see this particular scenario lists it for 2019-20, just because that's the screenshot that I had. But in fall of 2019 and spring of 2020, these are the values that we approximated for this population of students. And then just underneath that is information related to Columbia College's information. So if you're thinking, how much do I need to plan to have on hand in order to pay my rent? This is a great place to start. It's not going to be exact, right? But this is based on average costs within the area. So this is going to be really helpful in that process for you. Keeping in mind, your bill is always going to have what the university is actually charging you. Your cost of attendance might not have course fees included in it, for example, or those individual things related to very circumstantial things that you're doing at the university. So it's a guide and it's very helpful in coming up with a plan. That brings us to a point where we can talk a little bit about personality and beliefs and the way that they influence our behavior, right? There's some really key types of financial understanding out there in relation to personality. Um, the first of which is called money avoidance, right? Now, what this is if somebody ultimately has a contempt for money or wealthy individuals, and they may overvalue the role of money in their own lives while believing they do not deserve it. Okay. These are behaviors and feelings that ultimately can come from those, values and beliefs that we have, but get to a point where they're so overblown that they can be inhibitive. Okay. Money worship, on the other hand, your view of money is of a scarce resource, right? You believe a little more money will solve your problems, and you might prioritize based on that belief that work or family is not as important as your work, or that family and social relationships, excuse me, are not as important as your work is. Um, and that certainly can be a detriment on the wellness side of things, right? They talked about very much so those 7 realms of wellness and those facets that we need to be meeting and look at. Um, Putting yourself in a position where you're worshiping money can certainly be an issue on that front because you're overwhelming one end versus the other. Now, money status, this kind of applies to people that feel their self worth is tied to their financial net worth, and they might seek the latest and greatest as status symbols or overspend to appear financially successful. I will admit, part of how I got into financial wellness in general is that this was me for a period. I definitely was an impulse shopper for one, but two, I'd want to have the newest iPhone every year. I remember that was a big thing as I was growing up. Nope, got to get the newest one. The amount of money that I spent on technology just to look like I had the latest and greatest was extraordinary at a time where I could have been building a much better and stronger financial future for myself with, the $1,000 that it cost to buy a new cell phone. And then money vigilance, right? They value people that have money vigilance value frugality and place importance on saving. They feel money should be earned, and they may have difficulty discussing finances or accepting help. Now, frugality is not a bad thing, and placing importance in saving on it isn't a bad thing at all. And that feeling, but when you start to get to a point that you're feeling that money should be earned, and you ultimately are in a position that you don't want to necessarily talk about it, you can put yourself in a place where you're just uncomfortable with money. You have an opinion about it that can really interrupt your behavior and relationships with other people. These are things that you just want to watch for and be aware that they can happen, and they're built from our experiences and our emotions, our beliefs, and our values. So this is why we think about our personality so much when we talk about budgeting. Now, if you're not really sure about how this might impact you, right? Does your financial personality inhibit or prohibit your finances, right? Do you know what your financial personality is? It's an encapsulation of your attitude towards money, fiscal responsibility, and long term strategy. And things like your upbringing, role models, and your personal experiences, all like we talked about on that previous slide, can really impact it. Now, iGrad, this is my favorite tool in iGrad, just full disclosure. They have their money personality tool, which is a behavioral assessment developed in collaboration with financial wellness and behavioral economic experts designed to help you understand the why behind your money decisions. And it addresses different components of your money personality with explanation of your dominant traits, your strengths, your challenges, and all sorts of information to make your money personality work for you. And that's actually what we're seeing on this slide. This is a snapshot of my money personality. Okay, this is actually a 40 or so page booklet that you get after answering a couple of very general questions. It starts off with giving you information specific about the assessment, the why behind your finances and the science and the how. There's 5 different chapters of information related to your assessment. And you get little snippets of what that actually means for you. So as an example, you'll see here they indicated that I can be a bit relaxed with my finances. Absolutely true. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They talk about my strengths in relation to being relaxed, that I won't be afraid to commit to something, as well as my challenges, that I might be a little impulsive. And as I've shared, absolutely, that's definitely a thing I fight with. Now, from there, it's not just this is the information for you. These are some action items that you can take. And using the second one as an example, because I've done that personally, I mentioned my relationship with Amazon over the last few months. Section 2, they say slow down and take a beat before you buy. Don't just put it in the cart and purchase it. I've actually gotten to a point where I now put anything I'm going to buy through Amazon in the cart. I can't buy it that day. It's got to wait there for 2 days because if I don't need it or want it in 2 days, I probably didn't need to purchase it to start with. Now, when you go ahead and get to iGrad, right, we have all these really great tools available to you. This is ultimately what you'll see when you create your account. And at the end of the slide and presentation, we actually have information on how to do that for you. As I mentioned, it's a free web-based financial literacy platform that provides personalized financial wellness education and loan management resources to users at hundreds of colleges and universities nationwide, including Columbia. And on the left-hand side of the screen, what you're seeing is the main dashboard. When you log in, you have at the top just a basic header, which includes various different topical information, the over 20 plus courses that are available through iGrad on a multitude of different topics, the several different tools, including calculators, as well as the money personality, and a really robust scholarship search engine that you can utilize, as well as several other resources. They also talk a little bit about your financial checkup, which is just kind of making sure that you're looking at your finances and double checking that the information that they have is still relevant to you. And they also have a really cool tool called your student loan snapshot, which we're not going to get into too much detail today, but it lets you take your federal student loans and import it right into iGrad for review. And it prompts you to do that every couple of months as a reminder to look at your student loans. You think again about money that we can't see. Student loans is a really great example of that. We all don't always know exactly what's going where because we don't feel it moving. You'll also see that there's recommended content listed here as well. That's based on the way that you complete your financial checkups, as well as how you engage with the platform. So it's really intuitive and it's meant to give you information related to what's important to you. And we offer this workshop, as was mentioned earlier, in partnership with University Life. And we do this to make sure we're ensuring our students have the capability to achieve financial stewardship. We take the time to customize these presentations, not only just to individual student populations, but to the feedback that you share with us to make sure we're giving you content that best meets your needs. So as you get surveys, it is extraordinarily important to answer them if they come across, or if you have information to share with us, let us know because we want to make sure we're giving you the content that makes the most sense for you. And you can learn more about iGrad on University Life's website, which will be hyperlinked for you here as well. The last thing I'll touch on today is really just how important self-efficacy is in this process, right? It's cyclical, as I've said over and over. And one of the beautiful things about that is you get the chance to try over and over again. And the more we do it, the more we know that we can do it. Every time you achieve success, you'll feel like you can achieve success the following time. And as you do that and you're evaluating, you'll find ways to understand the stimuli that might potentially cause problems for you in this process. You'll understand how your decisions are being made and how you respond to certain circumstances. You'll certainly start to better understand the consequences of not adhering to the in the now moment of financial planning, and ultimately gain an opportunity for better control over your money. Budgeting, very simply, is the process that facilitates successful financial outcomes through practice, awareness, and a change in behavior. Just remember to be flexible with yourself and kind to yourself. It's not about, doing it right the first time. It's about doing it right for you for life. So it's going to be a little quirky the first times you go through it. You're going to have some setbacks and challenges, but those are all learning opportunities in this process. It makes it easier the next time you do it because no matter what we do, finances are stuck with us, right? We can't change that piece of it. Now, with that said, I do want to open up the floor for any other questions with the brief moment that we have left, and also share my contact information with you so that if you do have additional questions, you can reach out independently. But for now, I do want to take the time to thank you again for being here. You've been a wonderful set of students with me today. And if I can pass it over and see if there's any questions or answer anything, I'd be very happy to do that. Awesome. Awesome.